Welcome, everyone. Are folks in?
Yeah, folks are still trickling in, but you're more than welcome to get started.
Okay, thank you, Devin. Everyone who's here, welcome to Promoting Inclusion in Clinical Research, why representation is key to improving health for everyone. We're so happy to have you all join us today for a very important discussion on this topic. And I'll be facilitating the discussion today. My name is Michelle Ramos. This topic is very near and dear to me because I'm a program manager at Mount Sinai, and this is basically what I do. I've been with Mount Sinai for over 10 years now, and during a big chunk of that time, I have managed various aspects of clinical research studies, all of which aim to enroll and include high percentages of racial, ethnic, and economically diverse individuals. So I want to thank you again all for joining and for taking this time to learn and share with us. We'd love to know who's in the room today. So the best way to do that is to feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you want to include your name, your organization, or even the borough you're representing, that would be great, just so folks know who are in the discussion. And Devin or Danielle, you can let me know if I should continue or just take a pause for folks to introduce themselves.
Yeah, we could take a pause. We have some intros coming into the chat. So thank you all so much for sharing where you're from and the communities that you are working with or representing either by borough or organization. We've got a couple coming in. Please feel free to keep adding those to the chat as Michelle continues on.
Hi, Getty. I know Getty. And hi, Carlissa. Hello, Benjamin. Stephen. Dr. Lou. Elizabeth. Also from Mount Sinai.
Great, thanks everyone.
All right, so as other folks are introducing themselves, we're gonna move on and get right into our presentation today. So today's panel discussion event is brought to you by NYCEAL. And NYCEAL stands for New York's Community Engagement Alliance Against COVID-19 Disparities. It's a mouthful. Before we kick off today's event, I want to introduce why NYCEAL is, what NYCEAL is, what its goals are, how today's event fits into its mission, so we all have a better understanding. NYCEAL is a partnership between various organizations, including NYU Langone Health, Mount Sinai's Institute for Health Equity Research, Institute for Family Health, and a network of New York City community-based organizations. And this network works together to activate community engagement efforts that promote COVID-19 vaccine confidence and uptake among diverse inclusion in COVID-19 clinical trials. So with community needs and strengths at the center, NYCEAL develops and disseminates resources. It hosts vaccine access events, provides educational trainings and events like this one that we're having today, and much more. Taking a look at our agenda for today, we're going to begin with a review of the objectives so we all know what we will learn and take away from this time together. We will also briefly review some ground rules so we can make the most of this time together, create community, and maintain a safe learning space. And then we'll get into Clinical Trials 101 to lay the groundwork of what clinical trials are, how they work, and why they matter. So we hope everyone will be able to answer the question, why does diverse participation matter? And then we're going to enter into our panel discussion, which I hope is a lively one. We have a group of amazing panelists representing NYC and beyond that have a range of perspective and experiences related to clinical trials, from recruitment and research to those who have actually participated in clinical trial research studies themselves. And then we're going to open up the floor to questions so we can have a discussion and learn from each other. So that's a lot. We have a good amount to cover in this 90 minutes. We're together, so let's get started. Okay, so through this panel, community members and researchers involved in clinical trials in NYC, we will learn together what clinical trials are, why diversity matters in clinical research, and through the discussion and expertise of our various panelists, we're going to hopefully leave here more prepared to comfortably talk with our communities and peers about COVID-19 clinical trials, why diversity matters, and why people should participate. So we want to cover briefly a few principles of a safe learning space. We're so happy to have this opportunity to create community virtually, which I know has been difficult, but something we've come to kind of learn how to do in the last 2 years and learn together today. So in order to create a safe learning space for all, we would like to review these principles. And the first is, this is a brave space. So we want the room to feel safe and comfortable for you all to get curious, have the courage to ask questions that are at the top of your mind. We want to share the air. We don't have a lot of time together and all perspectives are welcome. So please be mindful of taking and making space for each other, for the panelists, for other people who are listening and participating, so that we can all get our questions answered. And additionally, we want to remember to challenge ideas, not people. So, you know, we don't all have to have the same perspectives, but it's important to remain respectful. A few logistics to review as well to make the session most valuable to you. Please share your ideas and questions for the panelists in the chat box throughout the event, and we'll be sure to address them during the Q&A session closer to the end of the session. You'll also have the opportunity to raise your hand and unmute to ask the question during the Q&A session. Otherwise, please mute when you're not speaking, and that would be much appreciated. All right. So I think the best starting point so that we have a shared understanding of clinical research and clinical trials is to share a quick video created by our NYCEAL network in Louisiana that does a great job in overviewing what clinical trials are and why they are so important. So hopefully this works. Zoom could be a little tricky. And we're going to play a quick video for you.
We'll never get to the gig on time now. I'll be able to play the bass tonight, right?
Sure, bud. I'll grab a bandage.
Irma Thomas? The Soul Queen of New Orleans?
That's me. I'll get you to the gig with a little detour. Hop in.
You're gonna need a wrist splint, antibiotic ointment, a bandage for the cut, ibuprofen, and a tetanus vaccine.
You know what all those things have in common?
They were developed in clinical trials. I know all about those. I personally led clinical trials for over a decade.
Many folks don't know what clinical trials are or how they work.
There's nothing secretive about them. There's about 300,000 trials going on every year.
We want people to know about them. What's happening?
Take it away, Doc Griggs.
My man, Doc Gary's having some issues. His wrist's all floppy like a soaking wet tissue. His head is pounding and it's got a big gap. Sorry about that, bud. I feel like in phase 1 is just a couple of folks. If everything's safe, then we widen the scope. The clinical trial moves on to phase 2. Lots more people and effects to review. In phase 3, there's a bigger collective. Gotta make sure that the treatment's effective. A stamp of approval means we're on to phase 4. Checking for effects when you walk out the door. Now here's your new treatment. It's proven and safe.
And I can rock out on my super cool bass. Yeah.
Hold up. We need to address the elephant in the room. I'm grateful for these medical discoveries, but this country has a dark history of people like me being mistreated by the medical community.
Sadly, you're right. Black and brown people were abused and lied to by the scientists and the doctors who took an oath to protect them.
It's little wonder that there's suspicion and mistrust around clinical trials and new medications within communities of color.
Absolutely, Miss Irma. And it's because of that history that we have protections in place, ensuring that trials are ethical and safe for all participants.
And why public health professionals, scientists, and doctors leading clinical trials are more diverse than ever.
That is reassuring. I want the best medical care for my grandkids to live long, healthy lives, but they need to trust that doctors will treat them fairly and with respect.
There's work to be done earning the trust of Black and brown people, but changes like these are moving us in the right direction.
Thanks, Miss Irma. This journey was really important. And addressing the elephant in the room made him a lot less scary.
Indeed. And now let's get you to that gig on time.
Hopefully you all enjoyed that little video. And if you did and want to share it with your networks, I'm sure Devin and Danielle will make it available following this session. I thought it was cute. It was very Louisiana. Okay, so now, and I know there was a little bit of an issue with the top of the screen, but hopefully folks were able to actually view most of the screen in the video. So now that we have a shared understanding of what clinical trials are, we're going to get started with our panel discussion. As mentioned before, today's panelists represent a range of perspectives and expertise in clinical research. We have folks who are active or past participants in clinical research. We have researchers themselves, and we have our very important clinical research coordinators. In a moment, we're going to get into a discussion with our panelists covering our main learning objectives, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions from you all. So thank you again for joining us today and in this discussion, and a reminder before I welcome and introduce each of our panelists to please enter your questions in the chat as they arise, and we will answer them during the Q&A portion. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Let's go to this second. All right. So our first panelist happens to be someone I know. Her name is Tranisha Williams. She's a midwife and educator with over 10 years of experience in New York City hospitals. She's the founder of a home birth midwifery practice. It's called Midwife in the City, and founder of Midwifery Collective, a nonprofit organization. She also teaches midwifery students at SUNY Downstate and is opening a Haven Midwifery Birthing Center in Brooklyn, New York. Tranisha is busy, bringing beautiful babies into the world. Hello, Tranisha, welcome.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be on the panel today. I wanted to talk a little bit, are you going to introduce everyone else or just me?
I think I'm supposed to introduce everyone else. Is that right, Devin?
Yep.
Okay. Our second panelist today is Karen Peterson. She's the founder and chief patient advocate of Karen's Club, a nonprofit organization that educates, informs, and supports patients of color with advanced cancer around clinical trials. In her 5th year of metastatic triple negative survivorship, go ahead, Karen, overcame extreme obstacles to gain access to quality healthcare and precision oncology, which ultimately led her to successfully joining a clinical trial. So given just a 4% chance of survival, Karen not only has had a complete response to the treatment, but helps others understand self-advocacy and the importance of making an informed decision. Hello, Karen, and welcome.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm so looking forward to this panel. We have so many esteemed speakers and there's so much information in the room. So thanks for asking me to join the panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being with us. Our third panelist today is Mike Omotosho, an undaunted advocate for universal healthcare, Secretary General of the Hepatitis Global Eradication Commission of Rotary International and Hepatitis Zero Special Envoy to the UN. Woo, Mike, that is a title. Mike is co-chair for the Community Advisory Board of Mount Sinai Cancer Survivorship Equity Accelerator Program and a citizen scientist with the Protocol Review and Monitoring Committee of the Tisch Cancer Institute. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here. I'm hoping to learn from everybody.
Thank you. Our fourth panelist today is Christian Rolfo, MD, PhD, MBA, doctor. He is a professor of medicine, hematology, and medical oncology, and associate director for clinical research in the Center for Thoracic Oncology at the Tisch Cancer Institute right here at Mount Sinai. Dr. Rolfo's clinical and research focus is on drug development, lung cancer, and other thoracic malignancies, biomarkers, resistant mechanisms discovery, and liquid biopsies. And he's currently the president of the International Society of Liquid Biopsy and chair of the educational committee at the International Association for Study in Lung Cancer. Welcome, Dr. Rolfo.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I didn't even know liquid biopsy existed. Amazing.
And we have even a society, you know.
Yes, and there's a society for it. Yes.
Exactly.
And then our final two panelists today are Tatiana Sabin and Aisha Francis, who I also actually know very well. Tatiana Sabin is a clinical research coordinator at Mount Sinai. She has several years of experience working with African ancestry patients for clinical trials focused on genetic testing and primary care. And she's been involved in implementation and analysis of both qualitative and quantitative studies. She's an engaged member of the IGNITE network, which is a national genomic implementation network. Tatiana also works closely with our genetics and genomics board here at Mount Sinai, which is an excellent stakeholder board. It's comprised of clinicians, research participants, patient advocates, and community leaders. Welcome, Tatiana.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
And last but not least, we have Aisha Francis, who happens to work with Tatiana and with myself, and she's a clinical research coordinator at Mount Sinai. She also works within the IGNITE network on recruiting and enrolling diverse patients into genomic implementation clinical research trials, especially in particular for the GUARD US study, which is around hypertension and kidney disease, and the ADOPT PGX research study, which is around pharmacogenomics and how those can affect pain and depression control. So welcome, Aisha.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay. So now that we've introduced all of our panelists, we're going to go into a few questions for you all. So please be ready to share your thoughts. I have a particular question for some of our panelists, especially Karen, Tranisha, Mike, and Christian. Can you each tell me briefly, and by briefly I mean like in 2 minutes or less, your experience with clinical trials? I don't know who wants to go first, Karen, Tranisha, Mike, or Christian?
I'll go first because I had a great experience with the clinical trial. My clinical trial was life-saving. And I think the experience for me was so good was, I had a really good team. I was, forced to, walk away from my original team, and it was very difficult. It was very isolating, and to have to start over and get a new team was frightening. But they welcomed me with open arms, and everyone was so nice. The infusion nurse, the clinical nurse, the social worker, the nutritionist, they made the experience very inclusive. They made me feel like I belong, like they were very interested in what I had to say, what my thoughts are, or what my challenges were during the trial. And so it was really, really important because I had not experienced that. So it was a great benefit. Again, after starting the trial, I was, I think, on the trial 8 weeks, and literally my first CT scan, I had a 72% reduction in my lesions. So I was extremely happy. But again, I had to battle to get into the trial. I had to battle to get precision oncology, battle to get all those biomarkers to identify that I would be a right candidate for this particular trial. So there's two pieces to it, but I would definitely say it was life-changing and a success for me.
Well, your persistence is commendable, Karen. How about Tranisha or Mike or Christian?
I guess I'll go next. My experience was life-changing because I participated in research in which I wasn't really sure whether or not I would be a person that they would find that would be a carrier of a certain genetic component. And the research was also looking at how, if you had this particular genome, how it may affect medications you're using and treatment options. And for me, at first I was a little apprehensive because I was just questioning what's going on and making sure that I was going to be heard and respected. But as I started to work with the team and they tested me and saw that I may actually have this gene, it was for me making me think about my life and how things what might have been different, and how there's people out there who don't know that they carry this gene and how that can affect them. And from my experience, it's made a lot of family members think differently about how certain common disease processes can be affected by just genes and genomes. And I know that if I hadn't had this information, I personally would make certain choices different in my life. So I commend not only the staff that I worked with, but also the information that I gathered from being a participant. So.
Thank you, Tranisha. I'm glad you had a positive experience. How about you, Mike? Do you want to tell us about your experience with clinical trials?
Oh, yes. Mine is mainly positive too, but I mean, mixed. So basically, I started my treatment back home in Nigeria, and I wasn't satisfied. Not the trials yet now, though, because we didn't have enough tools to adequately pinpoint what kind of cancer I had. They just knew, they suspected it was a sarcoma, but they couldn't even streamline what it was. I need to quickly add that back home we don't have specialists. You just have oncologists in most cases, and it's the number of cases they've handled that will probably make them more experienced in certain areas. So if you're lucky to have a personal oncologist, you will count yourself among the few people that are fortunate. So when I wasn't satisfied with that, I went to India, one of the best, well, seemingly one of the best oncology clinics in India, HCG, and they also did some analysis and came up with nothing too specific too as well. They just said it was, they confirmed it's a sarcoma and it was undifferentiated. I go back home and I was to continue the line of treatment again. They had started me initially on 2 chemo drugs. And after some cyberknife in there, they wanted me to continue with that same drug again. So I wasn't very comfortable with that. And that's how I came over here to the States. My first port of call wasn't actually getting a clinical trial. I wanted to see what is available again, talking of standard of care. And I found out it's essentially the same thing, the same 2 chemo drugs I had before, or a different one, the Red Devil, doxorubicin. And that was already offered, and I wasn't very comfortable with them. Actually, I reacted to them. I wasn't coping with the side effects. So I knew my best option was to get onto a clinical trial. So I spoke to most of the hospitals, most of the clinicians. They said they'll be looking. After like 2 months, I got on the net myself, and then I started searching. Luckily, I've been in the health, public health sector for a while, so it's easier for me to understand what keywords to use and how to go about it. So I started sending out requests, applications to several cancer institutes in and around New York. And a few of them responded, not all of them responded. A few of them responded. One of the early responders, I went in there, and I was particular about the trial that I wanted, because what that trial was to do was to inject the chemo into the tumor itself and help the tumor disintegrate. I'm sure Professor Kristen will know what I'm talking about. And then the second one was immunotherapy to help boost my body to fight the cancer itself. Unfortunately, though the cancer was still on, the trial was still on, but that recruitment closed for that very one. So they just offered me two. And one of them was a double-blinded study. Well, luckily we don't have anybody that is not learned here. So I wasn't very comfortable because there was no guarantee that I was going to get the treatment, even though there's confirmation that it was going to work for sarcoma. The second option had not shown any capacity to actually control sarcoma. It's just a test. Now I'm torn between two devils. Do I take one that does not have any guarantee of giving me a solution, or do I take one that is guaranteed to give me a solution, but I may be unplausible, for instance? So I was very lost and confused. And they gave me the pros and cons of both, but nobody helped me make a decision. So I had to make a decision myself. So eventually I picked the one that was not double-blinded, because I'd rather take the risk to hope that this drug was going to work than be in the group that did not have anything at all. I'm sure I'll be able to explain the consequences of such decisions in later discussions. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Mike. That sounds like you did a lot of research to try to figure out, a lot of things for yourself and finding what was right for you in terms of a clinical trial. And then Dr. Christian Rolfo, you're kind of on the other flip side of the coin with your experience in clinical trials. Do you want to tell us about that briefly?
Absolutely. I was educated as a clinical researcher, and I have the opportunity to start this journey of clinical trials in my career with the revolution of oncology that was the personalized treatment. So we have the opportunity during this period of time to have this way to see the patients around the personalized or molecular profiling of every patient, and go from there to select different trials and different opportunities. Then nowadays we have a plethora of treatment that were approved by FDA with a new paradigm. So before we was understanding the clinical trials as a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and now we are discussing about the clinical trials and the approval even from the phase 1 trials. So because we are seeing the characteristics of the patient. So my journey was really fascinating in this side, learning a lot, not only by the part of the clinical trial, but specifically by experience of patients. And I always say to my fellows, we need to learn about our patients every time that we are in contact with them, because this is a unique opportunity and make obviously the cooperation, and that's I say to my patients, we are working together, the cooperation between doctors and patients are making possible this success. And we are really, as investigators, grateful of the contribution that the patients are doing for the research, because without them, we are not able to advance in our, and it's obviously a very generous contribution that they are doing, sometimes not in the idea that they will be benefit them as a first person, but thinking also in the community and their future patients. So this is really a kind of things that I want to highlight here. But obviously then in my personal experience as a clinician, as an investigator, I was able to be part of also of governmental initiatives. I was part of in my former job, working in Belgium. I was able to work in the Ministry of Health, also for the commissions to approval of the drugs of the first in human commission. So talking about how to revolutionize the clinical trial for our patients and make accessible the drugs and experiments to the community, for the patient, because that's the idea, no? That at the end of all this process, the idea is that we are making accessible drugs that are working to patients. And obviously there are different things that we will comment about the differences in regions of the world, in communities, to access to these clinical trials that are still a challenge, because it's not everything so beautiful like we are discussing right now. There are several challenges, and I hope that we can discuss with our panelists today.
Thank you for that. And I know there's a lot of health conditions and just that clinical trials have made a real difference in. And I would say that cancer has really come a long way as a result, as you said, of participation of people, real people and patients in clinical trials, forming this community that advances health for other people. So thank you. So now I'm going to just throw out a question for everybody on the panel. And again, if you can keep it brief to like a minute or less. Why do you think, panelists, that diverse representation matters in clinical research? Maybe we can start off with Aisha or Tatiana, who we didn't hear from.
Okay, so for me, I feel that it just gives the patients better access to what health can be, or how they can do different things in their health that they wouldn't normally get access to, especially with the populations that we work with our GUARD study with, predominantly people of African descent. I feel that it definitely just gives them access to different ways, like Dr. Christian was talking about, the molecular profiling, and just having access to that is something that I feel gives our patients more, self-advocacy. So for me, that's why it's really important to have diversity so that everyone has the same access. Short and sweet.
I'd like to add to what Aisha said. I think it's important for access, especially in genetic research, genomic research, important. Oh, hi, Kojo. Important for the pool of people who are represented to be a variety of people, right? Because then otherwise you can't make assumptions or come to conclusions about things based on a very narrow pool of information. It makes it less generalizable. And I think, like in many things, it's important to see people who look like you, have similar experiences as you, communicate the same as you, involved in something, so that you can know this is a place where I'm supposed to be here too, basically.
And I would just add that it allows the research team to have a diverse population in which they can draw this information from. Because if we only have one type of persons present, we don't know if all of the research will apply equitably across all cultures. So that's what I also like to add in, because I know myself as being a researcher, people often ask, how does this work for me or my people? And how can you say that if all people aren't included? So that's something I wanted to add.
I think the only thing that I'll add is that I think representation matters, because within the community of African Americans and Latinos and just people of color, when it comes to late stage diagnosis, that happens to us a lot. And then there are poor outcomes. And sometimes the clinical trial is the only game in town when you've been diagnosed with a late stage disease. In addition to that, when you think about it, the window of opportunity sometimes for a clinical trial, for a life-saving clinical trial, is very small. Standard of care is never going to disappear. It's always going to be there. You can always fall back on it. But the opportunity to get involved in a life-saving clinical trial sometimes can disappear really quickly. So I think it's really important. And again, the last thing I'll say is the true efficacy, going off of what Trinisha said, it's important. How do you really know that this is actually working if we aren't represented? So that's all I have to add.
Mhm.
And actually, what we just to add what everybody was telling, and I think it's important the human aspect and also the I would say the medical or pharmacology aspect that also Tatiana was pointed. No, the idea that we need to have populations that are represented the different ethnicities, because we have differences in how we metabolize drugs, for example, how we respond to different drugs. So it's important that we include these kind of populations. Actually, we are seeing right now that in several regions of the world, for example, in China, they are doing their own clinical trials, including their own people, because the Asiatic populations in the trials are very limited. So we need to try to take conclusions like also Karen was telling, that are reflecting the diversity that we have. And United States is a unique place because we have a very variety of diversity. Is not that we can do only one group, and unfortunately, access, for example, in lung cancer to African American populations to clinical trials is very limited, 20%. Latinos is very limited. So I think we need to increase the access, and we have also barriers there. Access for the diversity could be also that you are not getting the possibility to go to centers that have a big portfolio of trials, so that is limiting your ability or possibilities to be included. And also sometimes the doctors that I see you in the first time, they don't have access, or they are not connected with centers that they have this portfolio. So it's a flow that needs to be adjusted to make this possibility a reality.
So Dr. Rolfo, that point that you just made right now kind of leads into the next question for the panelists. In terms of, there are clinical trials available, but obviously there's some barriers to people getting into them, becoming aware of them. So I want to ask those in particular, like Karen, Trinisha, and Mike. We could start with Mike since we didn't hear from him on the last question. What are some questions or maybe doubts that you had before getting into a clinical trial?
All right, thanks. Let me follow up quickly with what Professor Kristen was talking about. As a pharmacist, that becomes extremely important because there are discoveries that were made in the phase 4 trials because diversity was not totally encrypted, was somewhat encrypted during the clinical trials in phase 1, 2, and 3. I'll give you a specific example, the ACE inhibitors. People didn't quite know where it will stop working and for whom it will work until when it's been out there in the open market. But more importantly, I was going to summarize and agree with everybody that there's still a lot of suspicion out there. We all haven't forgotten the Tuskegee scandal. And because of that, it's imperative that diversity must be made obvious so that people will see that, okay, because once trust is broken, it takes much more than what it took to break it to actually build it back. So clinicians need to go over and above board to display that openness and let people see that, yes, this is a fair game and everybody is being treated equally. And that leads me to the very first concern that I had during my foray into clinical trials. For the records, Mount Sinai did something that actually warmed my heart. They said while they're looking for a trial that will fit my illness, they were willing to actually start me on chemo because I had a very aggressive cancer. I found that very heartwarming, and quickly, even when I eventually got a trial somewhere else, I insisted on keeping my clinician at Mount Sinai so that they can be my primary oncologist and then report back. In fact, by the time I had those 2 studies, I asked for the full policy. They didn't give me, they said it was a confidential document. All I could get was one on the NCA website and the NCI website and the consents, the consent agreements that I had to sign. So they gave me that. And I took both to my clinician in Mount Sinai. And we sat together. He said, well, he's not in a position to direct me what to do. I have the final say, but at least he gave me the pros and the cons. And what he said that convinced me was that, well, each of the other 2 drugs I was taking on this side have been proven to actually cure one form of the cancer or the other. So if there's further metastasis, there's likelihood that this will help prevent it. However, if I go on the other side, yes, it will be marvelous if I get onto the group that actually takes the medication, but what if I get into the placebo group? So based on that, I took the decision to do this. So eventually, it wasn't the hospital where I was to do the clinical trials that helped me with this decision making. It was still Mount Sinai at the end of the day. So I think it's important that they open up more and let us all understand what the problems may be. I also encountered the question of the length of trial because it was not specific. They said the trial was for 24 to 36 months. However, I could be on it, but if I show any adverse reaction, they can pull me off it. Meanwhile, there will be tests every 9 weeks. There will be biopsies to the tissue to help determine. I wish I could get something more specific. Of course, as a patient, I understand it's a little difficult. And I also wanted assurances of not just efficacy now in this case for sarcoma, but at least give me a chance of success. Yes, you're coming into a trial, be it phase 2 or phase 3. Since you've gone above phase 1, I was hoping you'll be able to tell me, well, if you respond well, you should be able to get some 30, 40% or so. So that gives me some more confidence going into it. I believe with any clinical research, there's a lot of innovation in technology now. And I was hoping that I'll find something like that. I mean, in this day and age, I recently just got to know about liquid biopsies before this, but I mean, I just got to know in the last couple of weeks. So incidentally, those are opportunities that I think should be thrown open. And I wanted to know what is coming in here special beyond the regular brick and mortar approach to clinical trials. So those were some of the concerns that I had. I'll pause now so that others will have the chance to respond to.
Thank you for sharing that. Karen or Tanisha, what are some questions or doubts that you had before you participated in the trials that you've been a part of?
I was sitting here listening to Mike so intensely, and he really, really worked hard to make an informed decision. And that reminds me of myself, and I can remember being very concerned. Am I going to have access to genomic testing in order to make a science-based decision? Because I just didn't roll over and get into a clinical trial. It was very tactical. I had to decide, and I had to make myself identifiable to a principal investigator that I was the right person. And my genomic makeup and my tumor makeup was that report was going to indicate that this trial, this makes sense for this patient. And that was the real barrier, in addition to really trying, before I even found the principal investigator and backdoored my way in, just trying to understand all the information. I can remember going on clinicaltrials.gov and going, my goodness, oh my goodness. And this is in 2017. And I can remember thinking, just focus on the exclusionary criteria. Karen, whatever you do, don't do anything outside of those borders, because if you do something to exclude yourself, you're going to be in big trouble. And at the time in 2017, I think it was, you couldn't have more than 2 lines of treatment. So really understanding that. And then the challenges of, I'd call a site, they weren't recruiting, but clinicaltrials.gov said they were recruiting, or it would be the wrong telephone number, or they would ask me something wild like, we need you to fax over your entire medical history. And at that time, it was like 500 to 700 pages at $3 a page, like on a fax machine. Like, really, this is what you want me to do? Or I can remember one, and this is science-based. I can remember going down to the NIH and I was thinking, okay, I'll do the CAR T-cell trial. And they said, well, you know, your tumor isn't measurable enough the one in your lung isn't measurable enough. We need it to be a little larger. So, you know, I understand there's some science-based things, but when you're trying to stay alive, that's not the type of news you're trying to hear. So luckily for me, I got my genomic report back because that's what I was basing my decision on. And I sent it to the principal investigator, and he identified that my tumor makeup was just what he needed for this particular trial, and he was right, and it saved my life. So I think really having access to that. And I had a conversation, just the last thing the other day, with a person who works for one of these companies that produces these tests for patients, the genomic test. And they said that Medicare pays for it, and I'm on Medicare now. And they were saying that they're really troubling research has come out that Medicare pays for genomic testing for advanced cancer patients, but since it's been approved that Medicare pays for it, African Americans and Latinos, for some particular reason, we don't get access. We are not accessing, we don't get that test. But in Asians and Caucasians, they are getting the test. But yet and still Medicare pays for everybody. So what happened here? And that was my question. They were like, Karen, we're trying to figure it out. And it was alarming because, again, you need science-based information in order to be able to make an informed decision. And it's really troubling that in 2022, when that test is something that's standard of care, is not happening in my community. And that's all I gotta say.
I'll just add in just real quickly, some of my doubts were, what would this information be used for? Although for me, it was, associated with Mount Sinai, and I understand HIPAA, but I was like, what if something negative comes out and someone reads it? Or what if my life insurance later on, they want to cancel it because they'll say I knew about something? Those are the doubts that I kind of had. Thank goodness, it wasn't anything as big as what Karen and Mike, those are big concerns, but I just was thinking about this in my future. What would this information mean to me? And would it be something that I maybe should not need to know that I now know? So those were kind of my doubts. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and that brings right to light that there are a range of clinical trials, right? There are the ones that are life-saving. There are the ones that are informative, more like the one that but they're all important in their own way. So moving on, I'm going to ask a question of our research coordinators and our physician here, physician investigator. Don't we all wish that we had people vying to come into our clinical trials? We usually have to go out there and be like, this would be good for you because, but I know that our research coordinators often experience some barriers in their recruitment efforts. So we want to hear about that. And on the flip side, if there's any facilitators you think have helped you in your recruitment, Aisha and Tatiana, we want to hear about that. And then we'll hear from Dr. Rolfo. So any barriers, facilitators that you've experienced as you've tried to recruit participants into clinical trials?
I think for me personally, especially with a pandemic era, I think that one of the things that I felt is a big barrier is a lot of the patients that I speak to tend to feel that they know more about medical terms and technology and research than they actually do because of social media, maybe because of what they're speaking with their friends about, their relatives. So when I'm speaking with them, they immediately have a list of things that they think is going to happen. And so I think one of the things that I've had to do is really try to explain to patients the benefit of the research, why they're going to be protected in the research, why it's important to them, even to the point that I've had to explain some terms that I didn't think I'd have to explain. Efficacy, everyone seems to know this word now, which took me forever to learn how to pronounce, but most of my patients know what this means. So I feel that that's been one of the big barriers for me. So what I try and do to overcome that is to try and speak to them in terms and ways that they'll actually understand. So, people hear genetics, they immediately get afraid. They feel like I'm going to put something in their DNA. Even if I'm telling them just taking blood, they convinced. So I'll explain to them in ways that I think they'll understand. So we tend to talk about things running in our family. So I'll say that to them, things run in your family, right? And they'll say, yes, boom, they've got it. They understand that genetics is important, that they're speaking in terms of genetics, even if they don't have the sophisticated speech of a clinician. So I do that. So it's a barrier, but there's ways to overcome it. I think that for me, I just try to emphasize self-advocacy. We speak about research. They constantly tell me about research that's gone bad. One patient told me that I was a great person, a great researcher, he said, but I was really taking female uteruses, and that was my real job. So you kind of had to find a way to explain we don't do that things are very much protected now, that, you know, even though it seems like a really extreme statement to make, that the idea is that we are really looking out for you. We really want to protect you. We are we are just a medium for you to be better informed and connect with your doctors. So the other thing that in terms of facilitators that I found works for me is speaking with physicians and clinicians in the actual clinic situation. I find that for our project that we're doing with the hypertension, I find the clinicians want us to help because many of their patients aren't taking medicines. So when I explain to them, hey, we can actually help you see how these medicines work for you. It's really special, it's personalized medicine, it's something new and exciting. The clinicians are really happy because a lot of my patients will come back after the 6 months and say, hey, I'm taking my medicine, I see your face. Not that I want them to see my face floating in front of them, but I mean, just the idea that they actually are impacted in a way that's actually substantial for me means a lot, especially for people in our demographics that actually have high rates of hypertension, you know, and don't like taking medicines for so many different reasons. So that's what I'm trying to do. And that's how I try to overcome the barrier of COVID, and everyone has a degree now. So we're just trying to, you know, let everyone feel included. You know, I said, what did I go to school for? You know, but that's what I try and do anyway. So.
And you have a great personality, Aisha, so that helps too, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know.
Friendly approach.
I try my best just to, I feel like that, again, like it's been mentioned before, a lot of the patients don't see people that represent them. You know, even when it comes to females seeing clinicians, there's like 3% of Black female doctors in the US are Black female doctors. There's just no Black female doctors or clinicians. I mean, New York is like this special magic place, but most other places, they don't see themselves. So I think it's really important that they're hearing it from someone who clearly is not from here, but definitely has a desire to see them just be more knowledgeable and be more, you know, advocate for their own health. So that's all I'm trying to do, just give them the opportunity. Yeah.
And then Tatiana, who's enrolled hundreds of people over the years into different clinical trials, we want to hear from you. What are some barriers that you've encountered, some facilitators that you found are helpful?
Yeah, I think I want to echo a lot of what Aisha said. I think she really hit the nail on the head. I think there's so many factors that come into play. There's some things that are kind of at the study design level that I think are important, right? That the study is designed in a way that can allow as many people as possible to join. Karen, you talked about your experiences, how you kind of had to be so vigilant about what you did and didn't do to make yourself eligible. So that's, you know, always a factor. But on the actual on the ground level, recruiting people, I think, you know, it's important that they build that rapport with you. So before you can do anything, you have to have that person open to a discussion, right? You have to get them to start talking to you and sharing what their concerns are and their misconceptions. And like Aisha was saying, what they really think the study is about and what they really think you're doing before you can even combat those things. So it's important because a lot of people, exactly like what Aisha was, you know, when she said expectations, I was nodding because that's the number one thing. People hear research and they have a whole image in their head of, oh, okay, so you're gonna hook me up to some things, you're gonna run these tests, you're gonna give me this medicine, I'm gonna have wires sticking out of my head. And they just, you have to get them to stop and talk to you about it first so that you can explain and really make them understand what actually is being done. So understanding, I think, is one of the biggest things is having someone really understand what the study involves, why you're doing it, what the benefits are to them, what the risks are. I think transparency is really big for that person to feel like you're being honest with them and addressing, you know, the mistrust and addressing the issues that they had. And when they bring up Tuskegee and when they bring up Henrietta Lacks, acknowledging, yeah, that absolutely is true. All of those things happened. And, you know, trying to explain to them what we have in place and where we are now. And just making them feel that you're being upfront with them about what the risks are to them and what's you know, what the potential benefit is to them. So I think those are the things that I tend to really lean on, is trying to let people take their time, feel like they have the most thorough understanding of the study, anything and everything that they want to know. If I don't have an answer for them, I'll get an answer for them, so that they feel that they can make an informed decision without being pressured into something or without going in blindly into something.
And just thank you for that. And just quickly before we go to Dr. Rolfo, your point about understanding, because you kept stressing people's need to be able to understand what they're getting themselves into, and just kind of like full transparency. And I think just a plug for our Mount Sinai Genetics and Genomics Stakeholder Board, who often helps many researchers at Mount Sinai. What they do is, part of what they do is they look over informed consent forms, research materials, flyers, things like that, to see if like, can the normal person who's not a scientist and, you know, went to school to do genetics or genomics or research studies understand what this study is about? And I think that's really important, is because even the highest person with the highest accolades just wants plain language. Like, just tell me what I need to know in a way that I need to know it and is accessible to me. So just a plug for, because I know some of our people are on here, that's very important. And there's many forces at Mount Sinai that are sort of trying to weigh in on the IRB. That, you know, an informed consent form can be intimidating to people, some of the language that's in there. So just kind of bringing it to a level where anybody could understand what it is that you're getting into, like you said, the risks and the benefits of their participation. So Dr. Rolfo, how about you? What are some barriers and facilitators you found in your work?
I think that we was discussing obviously the same barriers, but I can summarize that in communication, education, and confidence. Education is the most important part, and I am not talking about education from the team, but also for the patients. So in the last years, in general, we was investing a lot of educations in the teams, but I'm not sure how many educations we invested in the general population about what is the process of a normal drug development. And that was, with the pandemic, we was able to see that several people that is actually not going for the vaccinations or the active anti-vaccines, they state that the process of the drug development was very short for this vaccine, not knowing what happened really with the drug. So education is the most important barrier that we need to invest a lot, trying to make the people aware that the process is safe, is under the rules, and we are putting all our efforts to make this happen. The second one is the communication, and that is an important part from researchers. Try to use our time correctly, explaining to the patients what is the objective of the trials, why we believe that this trial will be beneficial for this population, for him or for her, and also try to explain why other options are available, which kind of other options are available, because sometimes I have the impression that several patients perceive that we are only trying to put them in clinical trials, don't telling them that there are other options. And also it's important that we communicate with the patients that if the patient doesn't accept to be in a clinical trial, that is not detrimental of our relation, and we will continue to take care about the patient. This is very important. And the third one is the confidence that I'm selecting of a doctor, a good trial for them, and that we will work together with a team. And obviously, there are several barriers that we can discuss beside that, for example, patients who have difficulty to come with the transportation to our center, that's a problem. Patients who are living in a shelter, patients that are in a community that is very far away from our center, patients that have not companioned, older patients, elderly patients. So there are several things that we need to work together to try to make these patients, including in the clinical trials. And I saw in the questions that somebody was asking for some tips. I think that the tips that I can give is that, no, communication, education, and confidence that are the most important part that we need to build up for include patients in the trials. And but not only include patients, because I really don't care about the numbers of patients that we have in the trial, but the quality of patients that we have in the trial. So trials that are really, I would like to include patients in trials that really can help them. And that is also a vision that sometimes is important that we put in our patients. We are not only interested in the accrual, but the quality of the accrual that is important. Because obviously that is the success of the clinical trial, efficacy, trying to find patients that can really get benefit and demonstrate that this drug can go to the approval.
Thank you for that. So up until this point, we've been talking about clinical trials generally. We've touched on cancer as it's affected some of our panelists. We've talked about hypertension, but a main objective of this event is to help community navigators and members who are participating feel more comfortable talking about COVID-19 clinical trials with their community. As you know, it's pretty much enveloped everybody's life for the last 2 years, and it's been the topic of almost every conversation. So of the panelists, I want to ask, what are your suggestions for people who are participating here and listening to us as they prepare themselves to talk about COVID-19 related clinical trials in their communities?
I would say at Karen's Club, we specifically addressed that by finding a patient advocate who actually had gone and participated in a COVID-19 trial who was African American. It was very important because this is the time that we live in. And I want the patients that come and visit Karen's Club to be feeling comfortable when they arrive, that there's someone from their community that actually has gone through what they're thinking about doing and can actually speak to that in a way which feels comfortable and not jargony and not, in a way in which they can just understand and they feel like their voices are actually heard and the concerns are heard from someone who's actually gone through it. They can actually ask those intimate questions that they may feel intimidated if they ask someone else. So that's how we specifically addressed it. And I think it's really important that, again, if you want patients, to participate in a trial, go out and find those patient advocates who've already participated in the trials, who look like them, who can actually speak to it, who can talk about the experience. I think it's not rocket science. It's real simple. That's it.
I'll just jump in and add one more thing, and that the people that are your recruiters are from that community and understand that community as well. Similar to what Karen's saying, that not just you want those participants, but those people who are leading the conversations. And sort of like what Ms. Francis mentioned earlier, about hearing what that person is saying and trying to dissect what their concern may be and addressing that issue before you even talk about any of the things that you want the participant to participate in the research on. So.
I was going to add too quickly. I think it's important to develop a distinct communication plan for the anti-vaxxers. What we seem to do is just dismiss them with a wave of the hand. I think it's important to let them know exactly what's the need for them. I tell you something, even as somebody that has been in public health for close to 30 years, I just got to know the real advantage of taking the vaccines. I've worked with hepatitis vaccines, polio vaccines, and several other vaccines. And whenever you take those vaccines, they're actually meant to prevent you from catching the disease. Now, the COVID vaccine is totally different. It doesn't stop you from catching COVID. It only helps you, helps your body prepare better So you may not actually suffer as much. And then it actually reduces your rate of transmission. A lot of people do not get this, so they don't understand why they will take a vaccine that does not prevent them from spreading it and does not prevent them from catching it. So I think we need to probably properly communicate this and let people know. To make this worse is the issue of the uncertainty surrounding COVID vaccines itself. You have the first dose, the second dose, all of a sudden there's a booster dose, a second booster dose, a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one, and people are just joking about it. You never know. So it begins to appear like an endless cycle, and that gives the anti-vaxxers more voice. Only recently, I think just 2 days ago, we read about Prince Charles going to visit his mother, the Queen of England, and she caught COVID from him apparently, and both of them have been vaccinated. Therefore, that truncates the vaccine campaign in and around such areas. So I think it's important to come up with a specific communication plan that will address this. The second point I want to make is I was talking casually with a group of friends, and there's this propaganda that the COVID vaccine is meant to eliminate people of color, particularly African Americans. Now, so what she did when she was filling her form, because it's there in the collection of demographic data, was to tick that she's white.
Wow.
She believes, yes, she believes by the time you tick first, you fill the form first, then they prepare your vaccine, and then you go in and take the vaccine. Yes, if you were right there and you're filling the form, you're taking the vaccine, they're giving everybody from the same pool, it eliminates such concerns. But when they go to prepare the vaccine first, they say, well, if they're going to prepare a vaccine, she doesn't want a vaccine prepared for the people of color, for her, if there's anything like that. Now, that's going to do two things. First, dislocates the demographic data that this is meant to collect, and then the suspicion still remains rife. So I'm believing there should be a way that we can adequately collect demographic data without having to make it like that. Or if you must make the data collection at the point of vaccination itself, so they see that you're taking everything from the same pool, or just come up with something. I believe when people, everybody is logical, or most people are. So when people see the reasoning behind all of this and they understand that it's not that the rules keep changing along the way, then the confidence will go up. And I'm sure this can be adopted by the experts.
Yeah, that's great. I was just thinking that one of the things that obviously those of us that have families in different places, everyone has opinions. I think one of the things about the COVID pandemic is that everybody does feel like they know an awful lot about medicine, like I said, in terms of COVID. So I think that I would say that, as we're speaking to people about COVID, we should just be as honest as we can. And even with me, I try to throw some historical aspects in, because I find that the people that I speak to, they want to feel informed. So I would tell them historically in Africa, they would use this they would try and be around people that had smallpox to try and get smallpox so they wouldn't get smallpox again. So then people are like, oh, okay. So then I kind of don't have to deal with the whole anti-vax thing, because if I can open a door for them to understand that there's some relevance, there's some historical impact and relevance, then they're going to be willing to step through the door, which is what we're trying to do, get people to actually want to be part of these trials, especially with COVID, especially with long COVID, which we're hearing about now more than ever. Where when I got COVID at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was saying I have some long-term effects, it was like, well, you sound fine, you're fine. But now I can say, no, there's some long-term effects. And I think that's what's going to get people to really want to engage. If you start thinking about hypertension and diabetes and all these issues that affect us and include long COVID or COVID in that, in terms of speaking to patients, then maybe that's going to be something that's going to allow them to want to be part of trials, because everybody can identify with diabetes, hypertension, or these things that affect our parents, or, you know, those people that we know in our families. So if we connect COVID to that in the same way, and now because we have some evidence 2 years on, we can say, you know, maybe that's another way that we can actually get people to really hook onto it. It doesn't even matter which demographic you're from, because honestly, COVID affects us all. But obviously there's some people that were affected and had more poorer outcomes than others, you know? So I think that's something that I was just thinking could be helpful.
Thank you for that. I dislike having to do this, but I have to, I think, pause the panelists because I do want to address some questions from our participants. So if I go to the questions, again, Ashley has asked, what are some tips, strategies that you all have found helpful for engaging diverse populations in clinical trials? And do you use any specific tools to help with recruitment? Tatiana?
I can talk a little bit about that. I think, you know, in addition to all the things that we've talked about, really how we communicate with people, how you build that trust that Mike pointed out, it takes a lot to build trust once it's been destroyed. So you're going to have to go above and beyond a little bit. We also try and be really flexible with patients as far as timing, as far as logistics, as far as everything we can do to try and accommodate, we do. And in addition to that, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought a little bit. So in addition to that, just using different modes of communications. So we have like a visual that we use in the current study that we're working on. I personally am a visual person, so I like to lean on that. Different people have different strengths. Aisha has a different way of communicating information than I do. So it's important to be flexible in that aspect as well with how you communicate to patients. I'm not sure if there's anything I missed.
To add like more specific information, because I'm familiar with the research that you participate or that you do, Tatiana, is meeting the participant or potential participant where they are, right? So a lot of times we're like, well, you have to come participate 9 to 5. Well, that doesn't work for a lot of people because they work. Not everybody's working from home. They can't answer your call. Maybe they have a job where they can't answer your call from 9 to 5. So we often, you know, we'll do Saturday visits, study visits, we'll call evenings, we'll call weekends. If transportation is a barrier, we make sure that some of our budget, you know, provides assistance with transportation if they have to come in person to the study visits. So I think those are all things, just concrete things that we also.
Yeah, I think also.
Go ahead, Dr. Rolfo.
Sorry, I think just to stress what you are telling is, I think we need to be the most creative that we can in our position to try to make the patients a very smooth process. So for example, in my former institution, we was working in a fast track for patients that there were in clinical trials, trying to avoid the long waiting space that we have, for example, for the arriving to the center, do the registration, go for the link from there to the labs. So all these waiting times that we add to the patients when they need to come so frequently for a clinical trials are obviously some of the factors that are telling to the patients, I don't want to participate in that, because especially for cancer patients that they have sometimes time that they want to pass with their families, or they are tired, or they want to be at home. So if we are able to create internally flows that are making the patient this process experience very, I would say, pleasant when it's possible, or at least very fast for them to go there later on with their family, that is one of the things. And obviously, internally, and like Tatiana and Aisha were telling us, they are really trying to make all what they have, but also we need to have sometimes part of the institution working on this, helping us to pass for this very quickly and make the patients willing to participate in trials.
We had another question that I want to make sure we get to from Ashley. Her other question was, from a logistical perspective, how can sites use patient advocates? And I'm going to look to Karen and to Mike for that, because you are patient advocates.
I think for Karen's Club, and very specific, it's easy because it's a free service. So it's really just partnering up. There are a lot of services out there, a lot of nonprofit organizations that are having these clinical trial initiatives. But with Karen's Club, it's really simple. It's free. All you have to do is just refer them, and we make a free one-on-one appointment with them, and boom, that's it. It's very simple. Just really find those organizations that are specific to the needs that you have for your particular patients, and just partner up with them. Put your information in your waiting room. Put the information in the examining room. If your patients are on the fence about clinical trials and they have some questions, and it's hard to sort of maximize your time as a clinician, as a researcher, you're in there and you've got a line of patients that you need to see, why not partner up with an organization that can help make your job easier when it comes to having those real, honest conversations about clinical trials?
Anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to follow up with what Karen said about the logistic issues. Part of what I think is a problem is just going into the community. I think there's got to be an initial recce to know the community you're going into. And for every community, there are gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers will do a better job of convincing people in the community than yourself. So like in Karen's case, there's Karen's Club. So the people under our influence will listen more. So Karen herself, or an official of Karen's Club, than somebody coming from somewhere else, regardless of how big the institution name is. So those gatekeepers need to be identified and then parlayed. You work with them, walk through them, and then they will give you access. It's important. Additionally, you remember the vaccine hesitancy case associated with Pfizer in Kano, Nigeria, some 25 years ago. You will not believe polio had huge problems. And that was why Nigeria remains one of the last countries to totally eradicate polio, because there was huge hesitancy to the polio vaccine. What did Rotary do? We came up with what we call the Polio Plus. It's not bribery. I know in this part of the world it's called lobbying. So you identify what those community will want. If you're going to see a set of farmers, then you go with maybe fertilizers. So they get fertilizers alongside the vaccine. Somebody will have explained to them, you will have gone through the gatekeepers, but there's something, so there's a plus. If you've gotten consent to vaccinate school children, for instance, from their parents, the day you're going for the vaccination, you go with biscuits and candy. So there's a plus that goes with the vaccine itself. That's something we may also consider. Everybody needs something. It's to target appropriately. Once it's well tagged, I'm sure we may be able to get away with it.
Thank you. Tanisha, anything to add?
No, I definitely agree exactly with Mike and what he said. You do need to know who he used the term gatekeepers, but I was thinking more like the community leader who will be able to explain to those persons in that community in a more general way of why this may be valuable for them. That's all I want to add.
I think we had one more question. It's a comment and a question. Nita Venjapuram says, Tatiana and Aisha, you both spoke so eloquently about how you talk to potential study participants. This can happen once they are open to a conversation, but sometimes people shut the door before the conversation can even start. What is your opening line when you approach someone about research? Give us your secrets.
Secrets. That's a good question, because a lot of times you're speaking to people who, when they hear Mount Sinai research, they're like, yeah, can't speak to you right now. I'll just be like, hold on a second. Just give me 2 minutes, and I just get straight into it. I don't do a whole big lead up. I say, look, we're offering these tests. We can help you like this. And then they are usually open to listening because, you know, sometimes they're just going to hang up on you and that's it. There's no way around that. You just pick up your feelings and just call the next person. But like for me, I just like, you know, can I just talk to you for a quick minute? What I want to know where they are. If they're on the street, I won't even try because they're not going to listen to me. They're on the bus. They don't want no one knowing their business. They're not interested in any of my screening questions. They're not going to listen. So I'll just be like, you know, where are you? Can I give you 2 minutes? I'm not trying to sell you something. We're doing these tests. They're really impactful. It's going to help you with your health. Are you interested? And the number one thing I try and slip in is your doctor knows I'm calling. Like if I throw that in real quick, they tend to be like, oh, okay. But because they always want to speak to their doctors and a lot of times they want to make sure that I'm for real. I've had people FaceTime me to look at my ID, to make sure I'm really Mount Sinai. You know, they've done lots of things and that's okay. I'm open. Like Tatiana said, I'm super flexible. Whatever you need from me, I'm going to do. You know, I'll call them back if they need me to call them back. I'll try and call them back. But, you know, obviously, as we're so busy, sometimes you might miss a call, but I'll try and text them. So I use a lot of texting as well, actually. So if I call them, I'm always like, can I text you? And usually they're okay with that. So, you know, I just do whatever I can to slip in the two things, which is important, which is one, it's going to benefit you. And two, you won't get this anywhere else for free, you know, or anything else, but whatever I can. Once they're hooked, once I know that they're listening, then it's easy. It's easy streets. It's just getting them to, you know, not to hang up on me. So I just don't come in saying, hi, how are you? I'm Aisha. That just sounds fake. And people know it's fake and they're used to these spam calls. So I don't want to sound like a spam caller. You know, I just want to sound like a person. I'm a real person who's just looking out for you. And I found that's been very beneficial. I don't really have to make much of an effort. To be honest, when I do call people, I don't find I'm making a huge effort. That patient that said to me about the uteruses, I actually said to him, so let's just be clear, you don't want to be in this. He said, no, I didn't say that. And I'm like, no, I did too good a job. You can't be in this. You're clearly not right. So I'm sorry, secret. So that's what I try and do. Just try and be as personable as I can from the outset. Just let them know that I'm looking out for you. This is not, I'm not trying to sell you something. This is only going to benefit you. And like I said, just, I don't let my feelings take control. Sometimes it hurts when they hang up, but you just keep it moving and just try and find someone that really is open to it because it's benefiting somebody, you know? So that's what I do.
And Tatiana, what is your secret sauce?
Yeah, very similar to Aisha. So basically just trying to make it like a conversation, like just, hey, I just wanted to check in. I connected to, it depends on the setting too, right? If you're in clinic versus if you're on the phone, you might drop different things. If you're in clinic, you obviously work there, but you have to identify who you are so that they're not thinking, okay, you're one of the doctors. I get like, oh, you're the social worker a lot. So just like identifying who you are, just, hey, I just wanted to chat with you about this project. You know, just to tell you what it is. I try and make it very low stakes, you know, just give you some information, answer any questions you might have about it, let them know that, you know, Dr. So-and-so is working with us on this, because a lot of times people do want to know, well, how did you get my information? How did you know to contact me? And being transparent about that. How do we get their information? Well, I'm an employee here. I got the ID, you know, to prove it. And we have access to our schedules here. I work in the clinic here. I work with Dr. So-and-so, so that they know, like Aisha said, you are legit. You're not just, you know, someone coming in from a pharmaceutical company trying to use, you know, test a drug on them or anything else. So yeah, just trying to not sound like a spam robot. That's a big one. And be like person to person, a human talking to another human. And yeah, there's a chance they're going to say no. There's a chance they're going to just hang up on you before you get to that. But trying, if you can get the little foot in the door to start a conversation with them, I feel like you're much more likely to actually hear what they have to say, even if that's, I'm afraid you're going to steal my uterus. Well, I needed to know that you were afraid I was going to steal your uterus, so that I can do what I need to do, and so that I know where you're coming from, basically.
I don't say study initially either. That's my number one. I never say this is a study, that's it, it's dead air. If I say it's a research project, and I will mention it's a study, I'll say it's a study, but just once I've got them to listen to me, then I'll say this is a study we're doing, because as soon as I say study, I'm going to hear Tuskegee or anything else. So, and I don't argue with people about it. Sometimes people have a very different view or understanding of what certain studies did. And I don't like spend time trying to convince them that they're wrong. I'll just say, I hear you. But I just very rarely say it's a study. I say it's a research project we're doing at the hospital, want you to be part of it. And I think that also helps not being pushed to the side so quickly.
Yeah, I agree, because study has these attachments. People think of the probes, people think of medications, people think of pharmaceutical companies. They think of all these things, and before you can even get a chance to explain to them that it's not any of those things, they've already tuned out, like Aisha said.
If I come at something, what they just said, it's important that the patient have the perception that we are working together with the study coordinators that they are speaking with. Because sometimes if we finish our consultation and they, Aisha or Tatiana or study coordinators are opening the door and introduce themselves, sometimes the patients are having the conception that we are not working together, that this is completely separate. So it's important that, and I am doing personally, trying to bring the study coordinators in the consultation together, discuss. I will live with the study coordinator. They will explain about this research that we are doing, and the confidence and the results are completely different. So there's another tip that we can add for this question.
As someone who manages and hires research coordinators, I would say, obviously, we have two excellent ones here. The ability to be a people person is critical. You can read a survey, you can do all that, but having people skills is really critical. So we have somehow just come to the end of the 90 minutes. So I want to thank our panelists for your time, sharing your experiences, your ideas, your thoughts. I want to thank our participants for their questions and for just listening in on what our panelists had to share. I am truly honored to have met some of you for the first time today, but I'm just blown away by what this panel brought together. So thank you. I mean, some of us are at Mount Sinai, we haven't met, so now I have to go find you, Dr. Rolfo. So thank you, Trinisha, Karen, Mike, Tatiana, Aisha, Dr. Rolfo. The last thing, because this was meant to be focused on COVID-19, right? And how do we talk to our communities about clinical trials, specifically COVID-19? We will hear from Devin, who's going to talk about ongoing clinical trial.
Hey, everyone. This was incredible. Thank you. You can hear me, right? I'm not still on mute. Okay, nope. I'm also trying to make this big for you so that you can see the whole flyer. So we did hear a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about long COVID. It came up in the discussion. Right now, as part of the NIH's continuing efforts to really study COVID, they've launched this initiative called Recover, which is researching COVID to enhance recovery. And Mount Sinai is actually a part of this national study, and we're currently inviting participants to join so that we can get to know a little bit more about the long-term health consequences of COVID-19. There's still a lot we don't know. There's still a lot we want to know. And so we're really looking for people who, adults who have had a COVID diagnosis within the last 4 weeks, or adults that have ever had a COVID diagnosis. So really either of those categories, we're recruiting people to participate. In order to study the research question, the researchers will be comparing the health status of patients with coronavirus to those who were not infected with COVID-19. If folks do decide to participate, they should know that the participation is expected to last up to 4 years. all participants will be asked to complete a questionnaire, do some lab tests, and also have a brief physical exam at the beginning of the study. And then depending on their health status, they may be asked to complete additional steps of the survey. And there are varying tiers of compensation depending on levels of involvement, but we will be sending this flyer out to all of you, as well as some other details and information on who to contact if this is something that you or any of your friends, family, colleagues are interested in getting involved with. But we just wanted to make sure we shared the news about the Recover study with you. And again, thank you all so much for such a wonderful, generative, robust conversation. It was really amazing to learn from all of you, and appreciate everybody spending some time with us this afternoon. And thank you, Michelle, for being a wonderful facilitator.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice meeting you all.